let's get one thing very clear first. I do have shares in a dairy farm, but I'm not a Fonterra supplier, so it's not my fault, okay? Right, I'm going to give you a brief overview first of the New Zealand dairy industry, and then we'll get into the rapid changes that happened over the last couple of years and what the responses of the dairy farms to those changes have been. New Zealand dairy industry is very different from the Australian one, as far as I can gather, because we have a reliable on-tap supply of high quality feed most of the time. Of course, there are some climatic variations year to year, but the grass will grow. And in the South Island, as long as you put the water on, the grass will grow even better. We don't have the issue of having to buy in large amounts of feed when it's suddenly available and then storing it and using it at some later point. The price we pay for that privilege is a much higher land price. There are some 12,000 dairy farms in New Zealand. The average herd size is just over 400 cows at the moment, and the average size of land is just under 150 hectares, and 1.75 mil hectares of land is currently under dairy. The big wave of expansion in the South Island has more or less stopped. We are where we are. The national herd produces around 1.9 billion kg of milk solids, and that means that the averages high facts, but averages are just under 3 cows per hectare, 370 kg solids per cow, and just over 1,000 kilos of solids per hectare. The North Island is still home to about 60% of the dairy cows in total. About half of those live in the Waikato. And the North Island is good for just under 60% of New Zealand's milk solids. The South Island has 20% of the herds, 40% of the cows, and 43% of solids. So there's a skew to bigger herds and higher production in the South Island. Give or take 8,500 farms are on the owner-operator structure. 3,500 farms are on some form of contract milking, lower order share milking, 50-50 share milking, although 50-50 is rapidly on the way out. Between 1980, way back, and 2017, I'll put up the slide so you can see some numbers. The number of cows has roughly doubled. The number of herds is fallen back by about a third. The number of cows per herd has risen. Well, you can read the rest, but you can see it's a story of less farms, more cows per farm, and generally a big growth in the industry. Production per cow has lifted over time, needed to, but the majority of the increased production per hectare has actually come out of stock and grade, not so much out of per cow production. And right at the bottom you see the rough ride we've had over the last few years in terms of payout. Way back in the 81-82 season, we weren't talking milk solids, we were talking dollars per kilo of butter fat. The UK was by far our biggest market, followed by the USA, Russia and Japan, and then there was a whole tail end of smaller markets, and China didn't even feature in that list, wasn't even mentioned. About 95% of total milk solids is exported, the rest is consumed internally, and the total New Zealand volume is about 3% of world milk volume. Dairy is still New Zealand's largest export sector, and our current top 5 markets are very much China, followed by the US, United Arab Emirates, Australia, surprisingly, and Japan. Product mix currently is just under 40% of milk goes into whole milk powder. Cheese about 12%, skim 10, butter 9, and the high value products make up about 21%. It's climbed up from 16 in 2013, so it's slowly changing, but we probably need more change. A couple more slides to illustrate what's happened over time. You see the per cow production lifting gradually, but per hectare production has lifted much more rapidly than that, and that's of course driven by this thing, by the stocking rate. And that's the total number of cows. For the first time in quite a lot of years, the thing will work. You can just see a bit of a tailing off happening there. The payouts have shown major swings in the last few years, from an all-time high of $8.50 in 13-14, and then it halved to $4.65 in 14-15, and even lower again. That was if you were Fonterra. If you were Westland, it was even lower than that. Luckily, Fonterra is now pushing it up to $6, $6.50, but Westland is still behind, another 50 cents or so behind Fonterra. So that's when you're not so happy being Westland supplier. Here's the history. You can see some new factories have started up. Tacoma has been there for a long time, and so is Westland. Intelact is a relatively new starter. OCC, Intelact, OCC, Miraka, and Oceania, by the way, are private companies. They're no longer co-ops, so they're venture capital companies. Oceania is mainly Chinese. Intelact was New Zealand based, couldn't quite make it, got Japanese capital in, and got Chinese capital in. OCC is mainly Telly's, which is a large vegetable company. So you can see the integration starting here too. The talk in the New Zealand dairy world is more about resilience rather than maximising necessarily the profit, because we know we're going to have swings, and the swings are probably going to be more often and wider than what we were used to, as in this graph. So it's not so much reaping all the benefits in the highs, it's how do you survive the lows and then still have a reasonable comeback in the highs. So what's the response been? Well, if you look at that table, nothing much at all. The cows per herd have stayed about the same, the stocking rate hasn't really moved, the milk solids per cow, well, hardly. Surprisingly, palm kernel has kept its place. You wouldn't think so, but it has, at least in this set of numbers. I'll show you some other numbers later on that differ a bit from this table. So I think this is a matter of averages hiding some of the real picture. The majority of farmers might be a bit slower to respond, but there's always a top 10% that picks up what's happening and makes changes as needed, and the rest follows a bit later on. What I'll show you is a bit of a combination of the official figures from Dairy NZ and what I've seen happening with my own subset of clients. About 2/3 of those in the South Island and 1/3 in the North Island. Okay. So first up, the debt. The national dairy debt has kept on climbing. It's a bit of a lag phase there in around 2010, but it's kept on climbing steadily. The red one is where you see the average farm debt. So that's it now sits at around about 3.5 million. The yellow one is the production per farm, and that has resulted in the blue one. So the average debt per kilogram of milk solids hasn't really shifted much over the last couple of years. You can reverse that. You can say, well, we've had to increase production in order to keep our debt within reasonable limits on a per kilo basis. So that's a bit of a trap that farmers are caught in. One of the reasons banks have still been willing, up to a point, to pump money into the dairy industry is this thing here. It's the land value. Now that's a skewed picture. You always get these low numbers if you ask the real estate people what's going on. The land value is not 34,000. If you want to buy a dairy farm in the South Island, you'd be shelling out about 55,000 a hectare at the moment. Why ghetto? I don't know. That's silly stuff. Might be up to 70. Makes no financial sense, but that's what's happening. So, what's happened on farm?